All right, just picking up where we left off. So last time we basically had built an app where we could log in as a certain user and we could create tweets. So this would be one tweet, this would be another tweet, and each tweet could be owned by a user and we would show their email address. Now previously, this functionality wasn't working correctly and we could only see the email address of the currently logged in user. This makes sense from a security standpoint. By default, the email addresses of other users wouldn't be exposed into the client because someone could, basically pull our app and get all the emails out and then, spam them and do other things like that. So you typically don't really expose an email address. What we should have done is we should have exposed a username or something like that. So here you can see I've gotten it working, right? So now if I create a tweet as Wesley F. Smith, it'll add and be owned by Wesley F. Smith. And what I basically did was I went into the code and we talked a little bit about the publish and subscribe, and I basically overrode the user information to force it to publish the emails onto the client. This is some functionality for a little bit later on, and I don't really want to get into publish and subscribe at this point. So what I think we should do is I actually want to gut our app that we created and start from scratch again to really demonstrate the concept that I was trying to get across in the last video. So the last video, things got a little bit muddled up just because we were dealing with users, which was kind of some new functionality there on that collection, and then we were trying to have a collection of tweets as well. And so there was, there was kind of, a lot going on simultaneously. And the real thing that I wanted you to take away was that collections have maps between other collections. So I gave the example previously of, let's say we have a restaurant, and a restaurant is going to have a list of recipes, right? So, or the other version of how we wrote this, there's a one-to-many relationship here. So for every one restaurant, we'll have many recipes. And this also applies when you have are dealing with the user account. So you'd have one user account might have many tweets, right? But dealing with users is just a little bit more complicated. And as you see, there's kind of some security components that I want to circle back around to in a later video. So let's just build an app where I want to have two columns. On the left here, they can create a new restaurant. And on the right, they can add a new recipe. Now, while we do this, I also want to start styling our app a little bit more. So we've been using extremely vanilla HTML with basically no CSS styles. And I want our app to look a bit cleaner. So it's about time that we added Bootstrap integration into our app as well and started using the Bootstrap classes from here on out. So in order to do that, well, let's start off by just deleting just about everything that we have here. So we'll leave our hello template, but I'll just gut all the content here. Then I'll delete all of our helpers. And I'm going to go ahead and delete our events while we're at it too. And we don't need this thing. Okay. So it's very basic. Oh, and I'll delete this line too. And we don't need tweets anymore. So that's about as gutted as it gets. I'm just leaving the stuff that I know we're going to use, which is our template.hello helpers and our template.hello events. And while we're at it, let's come down here into the terminal and let's clear out our database too. Cool, so our project is reset. I'll restart our server. And now if I go to our app, it's now blank. Excellent. So let's start off by going over some Bootstrap actually before we dive into the code that's involved in building our new app. So I'm going to go to bootswatch.com. So what Bootswatch is it basically just gives you some themes to make your Bootstrap look a little bit nicer, but all the classes are the same. So there's like a couple different themes we can pick from and stuff. I like Flatly a lot. Also really like Paper, so we're going to use Paper today. And now if we want to get this Bootswatch theme into our app, go up here to the download button and click on bootstrap.css. All this text right here, this is just the CSS for our app. And we basically just need to put this inside of our CSS file. So to select all of this text, if you're on a Mac, you can use Command A. If you're on a PC, you can use Control A. That selects all the text on a page. And then hit Command or Control, depending on which platform you're on, C to copy. We'll go to our app, we'll open our CSS file, and I'll just go ahead and paste all that in. And now we should have Bootstrap in our application. So obviously we haven't added any HTML elements yet, so we can't see anything. So let's go ahead and get started with that. The first thing you should know about using Bootstrap is the order of classes that we want to use. So class, much in the same way we have this template name right here, it's just another attribute at the element level of an HTML tag. So here we're going to say class equals container. And the reason we always start with the container is that we want our app to look nicely centered in our page. So let me come up with a good example of that. So let's say like if I go to Facebook, you can see how there's like this space on the side and the app is sort of centered. Let me think of another good example. So let's check out the Meteor website. So it's not quite as clear on this page, but you can see how there's basically like invisible guidelines here on the left and right, and then white space, so that there's a maximum width that our app can go to. So that's what the container does. It centers our main content and kind of provides this left and right spacing and prevents it from getting too wide if we are on like a really large display or something and it gets extremely stretched out. So you always need to start off with a container to do that. The next thing you have to do when you're building your app, you should think about things in terms of rows. So a row would be a horizontal block of content on your application. So here's one row, right? Here's another row, here's another row, here's another row. Let's go ahead and do div class row. And you'll notice I'm just creating a lot of additional white space here, so it's easier to read our HTML. But one unfortunate thing about HTML is that it does get pretty hairy quickly. It gets really nested. You have a lot of classes in there. And it will just be a matter of practice getting used to kind of parsing all the nesting and stuff that's occurring. So the next thing we want to do is, let's say we want to divide our row into sub columns. So what if we want to have a 3-column layout? Well, then we would just use column-md-4, and I'll explain what this is here in just a second. So every row has what's called a 12-column layout. So there are 12 sections inside of a row horizontally. So you can think like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all evenly spaced, that we can break our content up within. We wanted to do 3 columns, so do like 1, 2, 3. And because it's 12 columns total, we would use this -4 right here. Now, for now, just keep this MD like it currently is, and we'll go into depth of what that means in a later video. But basically just think, so column-md-4, there's 12 columns total, so that means 4, 4, 4, so we'll have a 3-column layout. And now let's go ahead and throw up a P tag inside each of those columns just to see what that looks like. Yep, and you can see 1, 2, 3. So what I usually do when I'm building Bootstrap, I'll often go back to this Bootswatch theme, and I'll just look through the examples here, if there's ever something I want to take, so let's say I really like this nav bar. Well, you can click on these little code braces that pop up. You'll see they pop up on like this block too. If you click on that, it will actually show you the HTML source code with all the correct Bootstrap classes being used. And so now if I wanted to use that nav bar, for example, let's put it above our hello template. We'll just keep it here in our body. I go back to my app. Here we go. Now we've got the Bootstrap, that navigation bar in the top of our app. Pretty straightforward. The drop down does not work. But you'll notice that it's taking up the maximum width of the page. Now if we didn't want it to do that, what we need to do is wrap it in a container. So here you can see that we're using container fluid for the nav bar. Container fluid does the stuff that you want container to do, but it doesn't put a maximum width on how wide that element can expand. So if we wanted to put a width on that, we would just remove the dash fluid and use the normal container class. And now you can see that it's basically our content is centered inside of the nav bar. And that's probably more of the appearance that we're going for. So it's really easy to get overwhelmed when you're copying a big chunk of HTML like this from Bootswatch. So my recommendation would be copy the whole thing, get it in your app, get it appearing, and then start changing the individual pieces that you want. So let's say we don't care about any of these links and stuff. So we can probably just get rid of that. So if we kind of look through our HTML code here, there's a lot of stuff. So we can kind of probably piece together, oh, nav bar right. That's probably this thing over here, and so it says link. So if we want to get rid of that, we could just delete that, and let's see what our app looks like now. Okay, so that's gone. So this thing's probably the form, this form right here. So if we don't want that, we'll just delete that. Now that's gone. And basically we want to get rid of everything except the brand key right here. So we'll look around and like, oh, okay, look right here. So that's where the brand is showing up inside of that A tag. So basically everything else we can probably just go ahead and get rid of. So I'll go ahead and delete that. And now we have just our clean nav bar up top. Now I'll go ahead and change brand. It's like the name of our app. We'll just say like restaurant app with recipes. Is that how you spell recipes? Define recipe. Oh, whoops. Okay. Recipes, plural. Okay, so that's definitely not how you spell recipes. All right, so it's recipes. Hey, that's what happens when you live in the era of spell check. You slowly become unable to spell anything. So there's obviously a lot of stuff going on there with all that Bootstrap that we used, all that HTML. I'll go more into depth into HTML in a different video, but for now, you should hopefully get the basic principles down of what I'm trying to do. And the most important thing to take away is just knowing to do a container HTML element, then a row HTML element inside of that container, and then a column inside of that row element. And so that's typically how we'll build out our application. Before I dive into the functionality of this app, one more thing that I should comment on is if you want to learn more about how Bootstrap works, just search like Bootstrap docs. And you see right here we got this website, Get Bootstrap. This goes through how the entire thing works. So it explains like how the responsive design on mobile works. It talks about the containers. Here it talks about the grid system. It goes really into depth into it. And they'll give you an example of like the different grid classes. So here's doing like 12 across. Here's doing like 8 on the left and 4 on the right. Here's doing 4, 4, 4. This is obviously much more involved. So typically what I like to do is I just like to start with the boot swatch and kind of copy paste the elements I want. And if there's something I'm confused about, or if I really want to go more into detail of how the classes work in what order, then I'll pull up these Bootstrap documentation. So just to reiterate one more time, the important takeaway from using Bootstrap is that we want to go container, row, and then column.